Color sensation. When we view objects, we attribute to them properties which characterize them. For instance, an ordinary person would say on the cherry tomatoes which we see in the picture as follows. The tomato is characterized by a spherical shape, diameter of about 3 centimeters, mass of about 15 grams, and a red color. In contrast to other properties, the color is not a regular property of the tomato, as we will see in this presentation. In the fovea, which is the central part of the retina, there are 3 types of light sensors: blue, denoted by S, green, denoted by M, and red, denoted by L. The large graph shows the normalized spectral response of each of the sensors. The small graph at the left shows the absolute spectral sensitivity, and it is seen that the sensitivity of the blue sensor is much smaller than those of the green and red ones. The picture of the section of the fovea shows a typical spatial distribution of the sensors. Most of them are green, somewhat less of them are red, and the blue ones are a very small minority. Viewing the world is characterized by 2 physical features. A. The spectral response of the eye is determined by the average response of the sensors multiplied by their densities. A typical result is depicted as the daylight or photopic response in the graph. B. The scenery is illuminated usually by the sun, and every object reflects part of the illumination. The eye senses the reflected light and creates from it an image of the scene. The main characteristic feature of color sensation is that it is quite constant even when the scene is illuminated by different illuminants such as direct sun, diffused sunlight, and various lamps. Edwin Land, the inventor of the Polaroid camera, executed experiments in order to understand how the sensation of color is constant under different illuminations. The experimental setup of Land consisted of 2 identical colored targets. Each target was illuminated by its own 3 illuminators, red, green, and blue, with intensity which could be adjusted at will. When an area was viewed by an observer, the amount of light from it was measured by a photometer shown in the left. Readings were made with red, green, and blue filters on the photometer. The illuminators were also measured by the photometer for each observation. In a typical basic experiment, a green area on the right target and the blue area on the left target were viewed. The illuminators were adjusted so that the light perceived by the eye from both targets was identical for red, green, and blue. In this condition, viewers were asked to identify the color of the viewed areas, and they did it easily. The experiment was repeated for all other zones with similar results. This experiment can be summed as follows. The observer can identify the different colors of viewed areas even when the light spectral content which reaches his eye is exactly the same. This result raises the question, how does the observer know the color of an object when the reflected light from it is not unique? This question led Land to execute the second experiment. In the second experiment, Land repeated the first experiment while he covered with a black cloth the area of the target which was not viewed by the observers. Under these conditions, the color sensation of the observed area was not preserved for the observers. The conclusion from the second experiment is that the sensation of color of an object depends on other objects in the field of view and not only on the light reflected from the object itself. This means that the determination of color is performed in the brain, since only the brain knows the image of the whole field of view. Another conclusion may be that color is not a pure property of an object like other properties, since it depends on other objects in the field of view. Land developed the theory of retinex. Retinex is a combination of retina and cortex. The theory of retinex defines an algorithm which determines the sensation of color of an object while taking account of the light coming from all other objects in the field of view. This theory is very complex, and this complexity caused many people to avoid it altogether and even ignore it. Here are more facts which support the conclusion that color determination is performed in the brain. The sensation of color is very sensitive to the wavelength of a monochromatic light, while the sensors in the eye have a relatively broad spectral response. Note, for instance, the sensitivity to yellow light. In many natural scenarios, a vivid color may indicate a message for the human. Sometimes it may be a message of the location of a ripe fruit. In other cases, it may communicate a message of danger from a poisonous animal. This may be a hint that color sensation in the brain is intended to serve as an important message for the human. Research on the brains of apes by the neurologist Semir Zeki led to discovery of functions which different zones in the cortex perform, and to the identification of the zone which is responsible to the sensation of color. The current understanding of the functions of the different zones in the visual cortex is as follows. Zone V1 accesses the raw image and relays it to other zones for parallel processing of movements, shapes, color, and more analysis. The sensation of color is processed in zone V4. Here are two cases of direct evidence from human subjects. Jonathan I. was a painter with normal vision. At the age of 65, he was knocked on his head, and this caused him to lose the sensation of color. Since then, he saw the world only in shades of gray while seeing very sharp images. Brain scans showed a brain damage in zone V4. This evidence is cited in the book An Anthropologist in Mars by the neurologist Oliver Sacks. Richard Riggs from Yakima in Washington State was a musician who never had a sensation of color. At the age of 70, he fell and was knocked on his head on the floor. After this event, he started seeing the world in color. This happened in January 2014 and was cited in many news media. The sensation of color of an object depends also on the spatial frequency of an object. In the picture, the colors of the three targets are identical. However, when viewed on the monitor of a computer, the higher frequency targets cause a different color sensation than that of the coarse target, with a feeling of greenish hue which does not exist in any of the targets. Thank you for listening.